So we're looking at a red maple. Red maple, Acer rubrum, native plant. It is the most common plant, tree species in eastern North America, according to the U.S. Forest Service. Can be found from northern Canada down to southern Florida. But that doesn't mean you could take a red maple that was born in southern Florida and plant it up in northern Canada and expect it to live. There's a thing called provenance, and so trees from a certain region are adapted to the conditions of that region, and even though the same species might be found someplace else, plants of that species that grow there are adapted to different conditions. This one came from western North Carolina, so it's well suited to the conditions it lives in. In fact, it never left home. This is one of many red maples that we grow. There's a couple reasons why we've got so many. One of the main ones was that I was told early on, don't waste your time on red maples because they're no good for bonsai use. And having that challenge thrown out, that became a very desirable thing to do. See how red maples work. What's so bad about them? Well, there's nothing bad about them. As I mentioned, they have big leaves, but you can shrink their leaves down. They will grow long internodal distances, right? That's the distance between two buds. It's a maple, so all its buds come out in pairs, right? They're oppositely arranged. That means they do everything in pairs. They produce their leaves in pairs, and then they produce branches in pairs. And that's different from other things which are alternately arranged, meaning every other, right? Not in pairs. So part of the challenge of growing this is dealing with that paired nature of its habit. Anyway, I'm going to send this around if you just pass and look at it. If you are new to bonsai, as some of you are, one thing you want to take note of are these things right here. These are the buds, right? These are leaf buds, not flower buds. These are leaf buds for next year. Of course, now these won't grow because they've been severed from the rest of the tree. But if they had not been, then each of these buds would have come out. And in many cases, it would just produce 2 new leaves. But in some cases, particularly further on up toward the terminus of the branch, you would get an extension that would eventually be a branch itself, right? So when you're pruning, you need to be aware of where the buds are. If you have the interest, you can look because this shows it very well. The buds themselves are a reddish color, a reddish brown, and directly underneath them you'll see a green triangular shape, and that's called a leaf scar. And among people who like to identify trees, identify species, it's often most easily done in the winter. And you use those leaf scars as a way to identify trees. Within the leaf scar, you'll see little dots. Those are called bundle scars. And they are actually in a pattern. You have to look at it under a magnifying glass to see this. But they are a key to identifying deciduous plants, especially in wintertime. But anyway, just take a look about. Because at the heart of bonsai is the world of plants, particularly woody plants, and how they grow. The more you know about this, the more useful it can be for you in your bonsai work, because it makes things a bit more predictable. One of the reasons I like working with plants more than I like working with people is that plants are predictable. In given situations, you can kind of depend on them to do certain things. Humans are somewhat predictable, but there's a lot of wild card thrown in there. And with plants, there's just a little bit. Mostly plants are going to do what you expect them to. You ever hear people say, oh, I can't grow plants. I have a black thumb. I kill everything I grow. I hear that comment all the time. And I think to myself, I don't say it because I don't want to be rude, but I think to myself, well, you probably didn't learn about what your plant needed to be happy. Because it's really that simple. If you know what kind of plant you're growing and you know what it needs to be horticulturally satisfied and you provide that, the chances are great that your plant's going to prosper. Now we make it a little more difficult when we do bonsai, right? Why is that? Because snip, 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 always taking away, always taking away. The plant's doing this. Why is it doing this? It wants to get big. That's why it does this. It's on a mission. It's all about light. All the parts of the plant above the soil line are about light. What's this doing? It's trying to get up closer to the sun so we can hold its leaves out here and get sunlight. So, in light of that, you do something like that. What are you doing? You're taking away from the plant. It put a lot of effort into creating this, right? And it was banking on this for its future. Snip, you just took it away. Well, that makes growing the plant more challenging. When we grow bonsai, almost everything we do to it, from the point of taking it out of the ground and putting it in a pot, to the constant pruning, to the wiring, the bending of limbs to give it shape, all that stuff is stressful for a plant. All that stuff takes energy away from the plant, makes its job harder. So what are we, a bunch of plant torturers? Is that the idea? Oh, no. I would never think of myself that way. If I really thought what I was doing was bad for plants, I'd have to quit my job tomorrow. The reason I love bonsai is because I love trees. If I didn't love trees, I wouldn't find bonsai very interesting at all. Bonsai is an artistic medium, right? Where you use the tree itself as a method of expressing your experience of nature. That's what bonsai is to me. Not everybody sees it that way. So, a lot of work has gone into this. It started out as a little one-year seedling. I got about 1,000 or more of them at one go. A man who was volunteering with me at the time said, hey, you want some red maple seedlings? I said, sure, if you got some. And the next day, he brought in a strip 3 inches wide, 3 inches deep, about 10 foot long. And it was just solid red maple seedlings. I said, 1,000, 10,000, you know, they were just jammed in there. I said, where did you get such a thing? He said, my neighbor's gutter. Because red maples are prolific seeders, right? They throw out seed and their seed is highly viable. And yes, they'll come up in people's gutters if you don't keep your gutter clean. They'll come up in the curbs and weed lots and everything else. It makes them very readily available. If you want to work with a red maple, you don't need to buy one. Well, you can if you want, but you can go out and find any number of them. And if you can find one that's growing and it has a trunk like this, but it's 7, 8, 10 feet tall, you just cut it down to a stump. And it'll sprout back, and then you can start out with something that's got some size to it. Well, these were little one-year seedlings, and we broke it apart. We didn't plant all of them, but we planted a lot, like 100 or more, right? And gave them each their own little pot, less than a gallon size to begin with. And then as they grew, we potted them up bigger and bigger. And in the beginning, we didn't take anything away from them. We just let them grow for the health of the plant, to establish themselves, to lignify and build a trunk, right? And then certain ones I used for workshops, classes and such, and others I used in group planting. So if you've been to the Arboretum and you've seen any number of our group plantings, like the one representing Appalachian Cove, and then there's another one representing Graveyard Fields, and they're full of red maples, and they all came from that same source. Some of them I stuck in the ground. This one went in the ground. It was in the ground for about 5 years, and that's how the trunk got built. Grow, cut, grow, cut, grow, cut. There's no secret to it, right? You put it in the ground and let it grow for a whole year, and then you cut it way, way back, and then let it grow again for another year. Cut it way, way back. And in the end, what you're going to get, if you make good choices, right? Because, you know, whenever you prune, you're picking and choosing. Picking winners, as they say. Yes, we're picking winners. We're picking this branch. I want this branch. And there was another branch here, didn't want that one. It got pruned off. It's like that. You make your choices. You cut, and what you cut is gone. And what you leave grows on, right? Grow, cut, grow, cut, grow, cut. Everywhere you see this trunk change direction, it means it got pruned, right? There's a pruning cut there, almost covered up. Big pruning cut there, not covered up at all. Here's another one here. Here's another one here. On up. Everywhere you see the line bend means the pruning cut was made and something else took over as the new continuation of that line, whether it's a branch or the trunk itself. Same technique applied. Grow it, cut it, grow it, cut it. All right. So, the year I dug it up out of the ground, I brought it here to this club and